Our story begins in a fantasy world. A boy hides from a group of hungry goblins. Unfortunately, he gets careless, makes a noise, and the goblins realize he's there. They immediately start chasing him. However, this was all part of the boy's plan, as he leads them into a trap. After getting rid of them, he reveals that he is traveling in another world. Let's rewind a couple of days before the boy was transported. As usual, he was alone in his classroom, reading, admitting that even in his old life, it had always been this way. It was by his own choice, as he preferred reading over getting distracted. In his class, there were different groups: the delinquents, the popular girls, the athletes, the clueless, and of course, the otakus. There were also the neat girls, the class representatives, and a few stragglers, but beyond all of them was our protagonist, someone who didn't belong to any group. Suddenly, everything started. A glow lit up all the kids. The protagonist saw the magic circle and got excited because it reminded him of his light novels. However, he soon realized that traveling to an isekai would be a hassle, so he decided to stick with his books and leave the classroom, wondering why no one else had done the same. Unfortunately, the door was sealed. He did everything he could to open it, but failed, trying again and again. Eventually, the inevitable happened. The kids started disappearing. Seeing the situation, the only escape he had was the ceiling, so he opened the vent, but it wasn't enough. The magic circle chased him and took him away. The boy found himself in a mythical white room. He began searching for the manager, the king, or the princess, but instead found an old man. The old man rushed towards him and explained that everyone else had already left, and that he needed to prepare to go too. It turned out that the old man was a god. Realizing that there was no one else left, the boy chuckled a bit, as even the omniscient couldn't foresee his escape route. The old man, a little hysterical, hurried him to prepare. The boy needed to set his stats. Normally, everyone has 50 points to distribute among various skills, but since it was the first time the old man had gathered so many people, there were only 43 in total. The best skills had already been handed out on a first-come, first-served basis, and what was left was rubbish. Still, better than nothing, the boy thought, and decided to take a look. The remaining skills were a complete mess, like having nothing at all. Annoyed, he asked the old man if he was joking because with those skills, he would never make it to the first city. The old man, tired of his complaints, gave him all the remaining skills, and so the boy automatically absorbed all the junk skills. His adventure in this new world began in nightmare mode. Once in the new world, he wondered what the hell he would do. Soon, he found his villager gear, which included an amazing bag that could hold infinite items. Not so bad for now. The boy decided to change his clothes and was now in style. Then he checked his stats. He rolled some dice and MM appeared, which turned out to be masochism points. His interface asked where he wanted to assign them, and the boy decided to put them into luck, betting it all on luck. In the end, his stats were calculated, and his luck was maxed out, but everything else was still trash. However, there was something extra, a skill granted only to loners. This skill allowed him to subjugate others, which wasn't so bad, but he understood that his adventure in this isekai would be solitary. Goodbye to his fantasy of having a harem. Soon, something felt off. He remembered being absorbed along with his classmates, but he couldn't see anyone. He didn't pay much attention to it since he couldn't form a party anyway. His priority would be to find a safe place, so he set off. After that, he would look for food, and over time, build a new home. The boy moved through the dark forest, seeing nothing and feeling a bit scared, wondering if he could face any monsters. Then he remembered that he had contact lenses, put them on, and suddenly, he could see hidden objects. Those contact lenses granted him the detection ability. Thanks to this new skill, he discovered a bunch of things, the most important being some edible mushrooms. Knowing that his bag was infinite, he stored everything he wanted. Cheerful and content, he continued exploring until he found a river. After hydrating, he headed to a cave. He advanced cautiously, hoping it wasn't the home of some monster. Upon entering, he really liked the place. Knowing he had a camping set in his bag, he decided to settle in. With a bit of his temperature magic, he managed to light a campfire and thought that, in the end, his skills weren't so bad. Suddenly, he began to feel sleepy, but before going to sleep, he wanted to check his stats. When he opened his interface, he realized that several of his skills had leveled up. He could now cast fireballs, had clairvoyance, perception, and enemy detection. Finally, he couldn't keep his eyes open and fell asleep. The next morning, the boy woke up very happy because he was still alive, and his items had additional monster repellent, all thanks to his shut-in title. He used his infinite bag took out a frying pan, knife, and meat, mixed the ingredients, and got ready to have breakfast. As he did so, he thought that this Aldean starter set was completely subtle. He wondered who this Aldean was, but he didn't dwell on it and decided to leave the cave. His goal was to look for more food, while also working on his safety. Suddenly, his detection activated. There were monsters lurking nearby, goblins. Although they should be easy prey, the boy noticed with his appraisal skill that they had very high stats, at least for him. He knew he would have to fight at some point, and what better time than now? Although his only weapon was a stick, he tried to make a small combo and managed to imbue it with magic. With this new power, he charged into battle. The fight was tough and frantic. However, he quickly learned to deal with the goblins' movements and was able to get rid of them. He survived his first battle. It wasn't perfect, but it was fine, and he felt happy to be alive. Upon returning to his cave, he decided to take one of the goblins' clubs, although for now he preferred to stick with his stick. When he checked his stats, he realized he had leveled up to level 2, and he was very happy about it. By the next day, he was sick of mushrooms and wanted meat. However, his mind conjured up the image of a girl, the class representative, and he was sure she would scold him for complaining about food. So he decided to eat everything and get to work on his defense, using his new skill, magical rapping, which enhanced all his physical and magical abilities. It was his best skill so far. He noticed that his appraisal skill had also leveled up, but for now he didn't know what it exactly did. A question mark just appeared over some things. He would figure it out later. He decided to go out and have some fun. The first thing he found was more mushrooms, but since he was tired of them, he desperately began searching for meat. He focused, remembering that the intention was to practice his magic. He used his magical rapping and ran out, feeling very light and fast. Confident in his new abilities, he decided to attack another group of goblins. This time, he defeated them effortlessly and felt so confident that he thought he could take on 3 at once. Just then, his wish came true. He quickly regretted it and hid. For now, he would let the goblins go and return to his cave to practice magic. From that moment on, he hunted goblins in the mornings and practiced magic at night. By the 5th day, he could defeat goblins with a single blow and had even decorated his base. He thought he had gotten the hang of this game, and all that was left was to keep up the pace. One night, he found what he had been looking for, delicious meat. He pounced on a rabbit and caught it, but while celebrating, he detected other characters. This time, they weren't goblins, but a group of delinquents. He didn't intend to even greet them, but he thought he might find someone else. He decided to use clairvoyance and discovered a group of boys ahead, the athletes and the geeks. He remembered having talked to the geeks a few times, but he didn't want to run into them either. He turned again and found the representatives group. That group interested him, as he knew the world he was in was ruthless, and the best way to survive was to stick together. Plus, he knew the representatives since elementary school. He thought for a moment that maybe he should approach them, but soon dismissed the idea, enjoying the freedom of being alone and having no one telling him what to do. He couldn't think of a better life than this, so he decided that from now on, he would dominate the world on his own. The protagonist is determined to conquer the world alone without involving his former classmates. Just then, his danger sense kicks in, and he notices the classmates who used to bully him in his past life. Quickly, he runs to hide behind some bushes, but one of them hears him, prompting the group to start looking around. Just as they're about to find him, a rabbit, the one the protagonist had captured earlier, jumps out from the bushes. The bullies think that's what they heard and move on. The protagonist follows them to the river, not wanting trouble but curious about what they're planning. He hides behind a tree and listens. However, they're just talking about the vice president of the club's breasts and the legs of the swim team girls. The protagonist realizes they're just hormone-driven teenagers and feels relieved knowing the class representative, who's looked out for everyone since elementary school, is keeping the girls safe. Suddenly, one of the bullies grabs a weak-looking boy named Tanaka and asks if his ability lets them do whatever they want. Tanaka confirms it does. The protagonist knows the bullies are using him like a personal Google search engine. The bullies then get up and leave, mentioning that the vice representative is waiting for them. The protagonist realizes the whole class must be in chaos and feels validated in continuing his journey alone. He heads back to his camp and discovers his solitary level has increased by 1 point. He assumes it's because he successfully avoided his classmates. Then he begins to ponder some of his other skills, like Master of Nothing and Wooden Puppet. He figures Master of Nothing allows him to multitask, even if he can't focus on just one thing, while Wooden Puppet probably makes him a puppet, his worst skill by far. Putting these thoughts aside, he eats dinner, once again lamenting the lack of meat, wishing he at least had some fish. That night, the protagonist struggles to sleep, disturbed by the sound of fighting outside. Assuming it's his classmates messing around, he goes to check. only to find a group of geeks battling goblins. The protagonist mocks their clumsy skills and wonders if he should intervene. However, his vision reveals that these geeks have better classes than his and are at a decent level. He realizes it's because they don't have to carry someone like him and have had the chance to acquire useful items. He recalls how his class was filled with athletes, idle children, and famous people, and he always questioned why someone like him was there. Now he understands that the geeks are experts in isekai worlds, so they're better off. Suddenly, his danger sense activates again, and he notices two goblins sneaking up on the geeks. Knowing they'll be ambushed, the protagonist jumps in and knocks out the goblins with his stick. The geeks defeat the rest and are surprised to see their former classmate. They thank him for his help, and the protagonist leads them back to his cave, now furnished with a door, more space, and even some basic furniture. His classmates are amazed by his setup. The protagonist humbly explains that it's thanks to a little earth magic that he was able to tidy things up. Curious, he asks what they were doing wandering around at night. Embarrassed, the geeks admit they were fleeing the class. They explain that when they first arrived in the new world, most of the class fell into despair, crying and panicking in the face of the unknown. Only they, the isekai experts, kept calm and immediately analyzed their abilities, but the bullies began threatening them to spill everything they knew about the world. The class representative tried to restore order, asking for silence to avoid attracting unwanted attention. But then goblins attacked, and the representative froze in fear. While the girls and bullies screamed, the geeks took charge, knowing goblins were easy prey. Once the situation was under control, the athletes stepped in to help. After the battle, the representative moved everyone to a more visible area to avoid further ambushes, and the geeks helped set up camp. Things were going well until the boys started complaining about their assigned tasks, refusing to work, and everything fell apart. From that point on, only the representative, the geeks, and a few other students continued to work, while the rest lazed around. The geeks also took responsibility for fighting off goblins. What concerned the geeks most was that several of the bullies had chosen abilities like Enchanter and Puppeteer, which could control others. The geeks began leveling up as fast as possible, preparing to face them if necessary. But they weren't the only ones thinking that way. The bullies started training too, knowing they couldn't use their powers until they reached a high enough level to dominate everyone. The geeks kept an eye on them, aware of their plan. The bullies openly discussed their harem plan, deciding which girls they would control and what they would force them to do. The protagonist couldn't believe they were dumb enough to speak out loud in an open area. The geeks reported the situation to the class representative, who decided it was time to confront them. Just as the bullies leveled up and gained access to their control abilities, the representative approached them to take action. It was like a fly caught in a spider's web, but a few seconds later, the bullies collapsed to the ground, unable to move. The geeks asked the class representative to use her sealing ability to permanently lock away the bullies' enchantment and puppeteer skills. Once the rest of the camp learned of the bullies' plan for a forced harem, they were expelled. The girls in the camp were disgusted by their intentions, and the bullies fled, both angry and embarrassed. One would think that was the end of the problem, but it wasn't. That same night, the bullies returned, seeking revenge by attacking the camp. The protagonist was surprised, as he didn't think they'd go that far. The bullies attacked the students and set the camp on fire. The remaining camp members blamed the geeks, claiming it was their fault for fighting back and wanting to hold them accountable, as if they themselves had burned down the camp. The class representative tried to intervene, explaining that the geeks weren't to blame for what happened. Some classmates sided with her, but it wasn't enough. The constant judgment from the others became unbearable, and the geeks decided to leave the camp. The protagonist, feeling bad for them, hugged them and offered all his mushrooms to throw a feast. He was so happy with their company that he even decided to spend the next day with them. After all, a bit of company wasn't so bad. After a heartfelt goodbye, the protagonist wished them luck and hoped they wouldn't run into the bullies again. The geeks asked if he wanted to join them as they planned to travel down the river to the city and become adventurers. They assured him that if there was any group he'd be safe with, it would be theirs. The protagonist agreed, recalling the old times when they shared books and conversations, but ultimately declined, urging them to leave. As his friends walked away, the protagonist reflected on how much he'd love to go with them to the city, but knew his poor skills and low stats would only make him a burden. He decided to check on the rest of his classmates, remembering the geeks were worried about the representative. On his way to the river, he encountered a kobold, which bit him. After a few hits with his stick, he managed to defeat it. Sore from the fight, he continued his journey and arrived at the riverbank by nightfall, where he saw the remains of the destroyed camp the geeks had mentioned. The place was deserted, so he assumed the others had moved after the attack. Following a trail crossing the river into the forest, he spotted the 3 popular girls. Nervously, he regretted coming and thought about going back home. As he turned to leave, thinking about fried chicken for dinner, one of the girls saw him and asked him to stop. Without thinking twice, the protagonist bolted, knowing they were the last thing he wanted in his peaceful, solitary life. One of them pleaded with him to stop. Surprised, the protagonist halted, thinking he must have misheard since she would never say, "Please." The girl explained they were looking for Oda's group and asked if he was part of it or if he had seen them. The protagonist thought for a moment and replied that he didn't know Oda's group, only a group of geeks. The girl clarified it was the same group and pressed him for more information. He wondered why they were looking for them and figured they probably wanted the geeks to work for them again. But annoyed, the girl clarified they wanted to apologize. The protagonist was shocked, never expecting to see them apologizing in real life. He told them he doubted they could catch up to the group, but the girls still wanted to try. The protagonist asked if they knew how to get out of the forest alone, if they could fight monsters. The girls hesitated, and the protagonist questioned whether they truly wanted to apologize or were just going to give up. The girls tried to explain it wasn't that simple, but the protagonist pressured them, saying if they weren't serious, telling them where the group was would only bring more problems to his friends. The girls broke down in tears, begging him to teach them how to survive so they could find the geeks and apologize properly. Suddenly, the protagonist's subjugation skill activated. When he checked his stats, he saw that the 3 girls were now listed as his disciples. He couldn't back out now. From that moment on, the girls began following him around like ducklings. The protagonist was terrified of his own ability. The girls acted like zombies, fighting enemies with a cold ruthlessness, and even enjoying extracting magic crystals from them. He was scared of them. He knew that if the class representative saw this, she would scold him, and he admitted that he was never at her level to give orders like she did. He began to wonder how he could cancel the skill. At that moment, the class representative appeared. When she saw him, she was overjoyed, but he was more focused on how to improve the mushroom potion one of the girls had just thrown at him. Frustrated, the representative yelled at him, finally getting his attention. Meanwhile, the bullies were already planning to return to the camp to retrieve the girls. The class representative yells at Haruka until she finally catches his attention. Surprised to see her, Haruka realizes that he doesn't know her name, so he keeps calling her class rep. The girl is irritated because they've known each other since childhood. Soon, 5 other girls arrive, tired from chasing after the representative. Haruka notices that they are the rest of the girls from the class. The class rep asks Haruka what's going on with Shimazaki and her friends. He's unsure how to explain what just happened. Haruka fills her in on everything, including how he subjugated them. The class rep can't believe what she's hearing and tells him that such an ability is meant for monsters. Haruka admits he doesn't know how it happened. It just did. All the girls glare at him coldly, imagining his wicked intentions. Haruka tries to leave and go home, but the girls stop him. The class rep manages to snap Shimazaki out of her strange trance and questions her about what happened, as she doesn't trust Haruka. While they interrogate the girls, Haruka sits down, waiting. Bored, he decides to practice his earth magic to improve his house, but the spell goes wrong and he ends up buried in the ground. The class rep pulls him out, unsure of how he could do that to himself. It turns out the girls explained that Haruka didn't do anything bad to them. In fact, he went looking for them because he was worried something might have happened. Haruka doesn't remember saying or doing anything like that. The girls apologize to him and thank him. With everything resolved, Haruka insists he wants to go home. The girls can't believe he wants to leave them now, and the class rep doesn't understand what he means by home. Haruka explains that he had a lot of free time, so he built a house. The girls are shocked and think it's a great idea. The class rep blows her whistle, starting another meeting, and once again, Haruka is left out of it. Suddenly they ask how many people can fit in his house. Without much interest, he replies that if 6 people fit per tatami mat, maybe around 240 could fit, more if they remove the furniture. The girls are surprised he has furniture. He tells them he also has a kitchen, a lounge, and a bathroom. The class rep asks if he lives in a mansion, adding that they've been living in survival mode since they arrived. The girls make a decision and ask the class rep to proceed with the plan. Embarrassed, the class rep asks Haruka if they could at least spend one night in his house. Haruka loses his mind at the thought of having an entire class of high school girls all to himself. He starts leading them through the forest, using his location ability. The girls don't understand how he can navigate corners and intersections so well. The class rep sarcastically asks if his house has a store too, but Haruka replies that he's considered building a pharmacy. Finally, they arrive at Haruka's house, and this time it looks much better. It's had several upgrades since the last time it was shown, and the girls are astonished by the palace-like home. They cry with happiness. Relieved, they won't have to spend the night in a tent. Haruka shows them where the rooms are, but before he can finish, the girls have already run off to the bathroom, tearing off their clothes. The only one keeping her composure is the class rep, who tells them to control themselves. The girls undress and hop into the bath. Haruka knows that spending so much time in the forest has turned them into savages. At night, it's time to sleep, and Haruka is happy to finally have some alone time. But just then, the class rep enters, thanking him for what he's done for them. She explains that after the bullies left, the rest of the boys also abandoned them, leaving them all alone. Having decent food and a bath lifted their spirits. She also confesses that she feels guilty because, despite being responsible for everyone, she hasn't been able to protect them. Haruka disagrees, pointing out that everyone is still safe. Even so, the class rep insists she hasn't been able to contribute as much as Oda and his friends. Haruka tells her that those geeks were practically raised for the day they'd be transported here, and that in any case, they are the weird ones. The class rep scolds him for saying something so rude, but he explains that he just wanted to show her that she can't compare to them in that aspect. Haruka's words lift her spirits. However, she also realizes that if Haruka can build houses, cook, and defeat monsters, then he's even stranger than the geeks. She thanks him for everything, wishes him good night, and leaves. That night, Haruka struggles to fall asleep, imagining his classmates in pajamas and underwear in his house. The next morning, Haruka wakes up to find a girl in his tent, telling him that breakfast is ready. Haruka wants to stay in bed a little longer, but the girl comes closer, even getting on top of him. Nervous, he tries to change the subject and asks what's for breakfast. She answers, mushrooms and fish. Hearing there's fish, Haruka jumps up, accidentally hitting the girl's head. He rushes out to eat the fish and savors every bite, saying it's been so long since he had one. The girls are surprised since he lives by a river. He tells them he spent days eating mushrooms and watching the fish, but when he tried to catch one, they'd slip away because they were so slimy and slippery. He asks if they have an easy way to catch them. They take him to the river, where one of the girls charges a lightning spell in her hand and throws it into the water, causing several fish to jump out. Haruka is amazed at how effective it is and begs her to do it again. The girl charges her hand with lightning magic again, but this time Haruka approaches and creates a transparent box that captures the spell. He says he's using his packaging magic to wrap and store the lightning magic. He throws the box into the river and finally catches his first fish. Additionally, he gains the lightning magic ability. The girl wonders how he acquired her magic, and the class rep asks Haruka what he's done. He explains that with his packaging magic, he can acquire elemental magic of any type. The class rep realizes that this makes it a pretty powerful technique. Haruka thinks it's due to the combination of his packaging ability and his jack-of-all-trades skill. He's learned that even the weakest abilities have their uses. The class rep is amazed by how strong he is, but he reminds her that he only has leftover abilities and that they got the truly powerful ones. He even admits that he almost peed himself from the overwhelming power he just gained. They sit by the river, and Haruka asks what their plans are. The class rep is considering going to the city, and it makes sense to him since Shimazaki and her friends wanted to hunt down the geeks there. The girls clarify that they don't want to hunt them down, just apologize. The class rep mentions that before they leave, they should probably level up. Haruka agrees, noting that without that, they won't be able to hunt the geeks. Shimazaki and her friends reiterate that they don't want to hunt them down. Haruka agrees with the plan and offers to help them train. The class rep thanks him, but clarifies once more that they're not Hunt Oda and his friends. Haruka finally understands and thinks it's a shame because he wanted to see them fight with their abilities at full power. Everyone gathers in the forest, and before they begin, Haruka wants to know what level the girls are at. They start sharing their levels, and the lowest is 16, which Haruka can't believe, especially since he's still level 7. The girls grow impatient, eager to start training. Haruka realizes they don't really need him, but then he gets an idea. He gives them their first mission, to wipe out all the low-level kobolds. The poor kobolds don't know what they did to deserve this. The girls see that none of the kobolds are above level 10 and know it'll be easy. They prepare to fight, but the kobolds win without any trouble. Haruka calls it pathetic. The girls complain that they didn't mention how fast the kobolds were or that they'd bite. They all gather in Haruka's magic tent to come up with a new plan, and he doesn't understand why they're doing it in his tent. After a few minutes, they emerge, motivated and ready, determined to defeat the kobolds. Haruka is glad to finally have some time to himself, but the same girl who woke him up in the morning remains in the tent. She apologizes and confesses that she tested him because in the last camp, the boys almost caught her, which was very traumatic, and she was worried he might try to take advantage of them too. Haruka realizes these girls have been through a lot. She thanks him for giving them a home, food, and training, promising to wake him up every morning when the fish is ready. Haruka thanks her and nicknames her Fish Girl. The next morning, Fish Girl keeps her promise and brings him fish for breakfast. He hears the other girls leaving the house, motivated and eager to seek revenge on the kobolds, but the class rep stops them, reminding them that they need to train first. The training involves fighting a goblin. The girls battle it and are almost immediately defeated. After a few days of training, the rematch arrives. The kobolds mock them, which angers the girls. Some of them fall asleep before the encounter, and others complain of stomach aches trying to avoid the fight. The more motivated girls face the kobolds, fight as a team, and finally manage to defeat them. The class rep congratulates them, and Haruka realizes he was worried for nothing. The girls shake hands with the kobolds, making amends. Haruka feels relieved, thinking he can finally return to his peaceful, solitary life, but the class rep asks if they can now accompany him to the city. He tells her he never agreed to go with them, but the class rep pleads. The day arrives, and the class rep and the girls are ready to set off, checking to make sure they have everything. Meanwhile, Haruka asks Fish Girl to pack as much as possible in her bag. The class rep says the bag is already full, and Haruka agrees, so he decides to leave her behind. Fish Girl resigns herself to being left, but the class rep tells Haruka he has to bring her along. They all set off together for the city. Haruka warns the class rep that they don't know what they'll encounter on the way, so they need to be careful. In the forest, a boy is being chased by a hooded man. When he catches him, the boy begs for his life, but the man ignores him.